Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Budgets are about choices. They're never a simple exercise, but they tell Albertans what your values are. And the values of the Alberta Party are very much in the spirit of not just simply opposing everything the government does, reflexively because the government has done it, but making sure that in holding the government to account, which is an important job of opposition, not simply opposing for the sake of opposition, but proposing ideas. That's a core value of the Alberta Party, and I think Albertans very much appreciate that style of politics. I think it's something that's been missing in this province for too long. So while I certainly will offer some critique of this government's budget, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk not about what the government's done wrong, I'm going to talk about what the Alberta Party would do differently. How would we approach the fiscal challenges facing our province? How would we craft a budget that is going to be optimistic, that's going to speak to the opportunities that exist in our province? And make no mistake, there are tremendous opportunities in this province. Alberta is a remarkable place to live. We have the highest quality of life of almost anywhere in the world. We have some of, if not the most innovative, entrepreneurial, caring, remarkable people anywhere in the world. A lot of that strength comes from the diversity of this province. And that is something that we believe must be leveraged and tapped into, appreciated and celebrated. Diversity of all kinds. We need to find pathways for Indigenous people to participate much more fully in society and community, to address some of the terrible inequities that have happened through time, but to realize the opportunity that comes from unlocking that talent that exists within Indigenous communities, that exists within communities of new Canadians, that exists within communities of people who have been here for a long time. There are opportunities in this province that are not, unfortunately, being fully realized. One of the first things the Alberta Party would do to recognize and realize those opportunities is we would invest more in K-12 education than this government's budget proposes to. That is a value that we hold dear, that if we are going to educate a capable, diverse workforce that is not only prepared for the 21st century, but is going to create the 21st century, that are going to create the jobs of the future right here in Alberta. And the other thing the Alberta Party believes in is the power of and. So while we believe we can create the next economy right here in Alberta, we also believe that we can and should have a strong oil and gas sector in this province. That although the world is changing around us, we absolutely must get our products to Tidewater. We absolutely must find a reasonable regulatory structure that ensures that Alberta develops our oil and gas properties, our oil and gas assets responsibly, which we have always done in this province, but we do so in a way that has a minimum of red tape, that attracts investment back to Alberta, that does not see the capital fleeing to the United States and other jurisdictions as it has. So we create an attractive investment climate in this province, that we ensure that the people will be investing in Alberta, creating those jobs in Alberta like we've done in this province for so long, so successfully. Other choices we need to make, the Alberta Party would find ways of ensuring our healthcare system is far more efficient and effective than it is. Our health budget takes up nearly 50%. Health spending in this province takes up nearly 50% of every dollar spent in this province. That is far too high, and those costs continue to increase. We would find efficiencies within the public health care system by ensuring, first and foremost, that frontline personnel feel that they have a stake in making the system better. For too long, it's been a top-down, closed culture that does not welcome innovation. One of the most important things we can do is reform AHS culture to make AHS more receptive to innovation in service delivery. The Alberta Party believes too many patients are being treated in acute care facilities when they would be far more comfortable in community, in more appropriate settings, and they would have better health outcomes. They would be closer to home, closer to their families, and it would save us money. That must be an imperative. There's far too much duplication and overlap between AHS and Alberta Health. That not only costs money to simply physically run, but it slows down the pace of change, the pace of innovation. It slows down adaptiveness and responsiveness. And the people that I talk with in the system are profoundly, incredibly frustrated because they have gone into health care because of the emphasis on that second word, on care. It's a caring profession. They want to make the system work. They have a stake in making the system work, but far too often they feel beaten down, they feel dismissed, they feel that they can't have the impact that they want, they can't bring the changes that they want because the system just simply holds them back. And the duplication and overlap between AHS and Alberta Health has a big impact on that. We would reform EMS dispatch to ensure that paramedics are not stuck in emerge, waiting with the patient, and that those paramedics are instead on the roads where we need them, providing the services that Albertans rely on, those remarkable people who are looking out for us in our most desperate times, are not stuck in emerge, but they're out on the road doing the work that we need them to do. The Alberta Party would review unfilled positions within AHS management structure and make sure that money is not being spent simply holding a position. We'd focus on wellness, on mental health, on long-term care, on chronic conditions like dementia. We would bring in a proper dementia strategy, not just some headlines and some rehashed announcements, some re-announcements. We would genuinely and truly listen to people in community, those with dementia, their loved ones and caregivers, to make sure that we get it right on these important areas. And speaking of another important area, AISH and PDD. The Alberta Party would not only index AISH payments to the cost of living, we would make a one-time catch-up payment. AISH has not been increased in this province since 2012. And that is one of probably the most surprising and profoundly disappointing aspects of not just this budget, but of all three previous budgets, this NDP government, this government that is supposedly there for the less fortunate, for the people who in our community we need to ensure that we are looking out for. They have let those people down. And the most tangible example of that is the fact that AISH funding has not yet been increased. And I'm afraid that as we head into an election year, this is the kind of thing that we can expect to be made as part of an election platform. I was always taught to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Increasing funding for AISH is the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do in 2015 and 16 and 17 and 18, and just because none of those years had an election in them didn't mean that you shouldn't have done that. And so that's one thing the Alberta Party would do, catch up AISH funding and index it going forward. We would focus on social innovation. We would partner with the not-for-profit sector and ensure that they are partners with the government in innovative and cost-effective service delivery. This is an area where we have a strong sense of volunteerism, we have a remarkably robust not-for-profit sector, and we have opportunities to innovate in how we make those services more efficient. The government should be using its role as funder to compel some efficiency within that system, within that structure. There are multiple disconnected government agencies. Not-for-profits I talk with are profoundly frustrated at the stovepipes that happen. They work to specific granting envelopes, and even if those don't make a lot of sense, they do what they need to do to keep the lights on. We need a more flexible, a more innovative funding model to ensure that not-for-profits can deliver the services that Albertans deserve. Seniors housing. You know, one of the most remarkable things I learned in the estimates process with seniors in housing was that the vaunted $1.2 billion 5-year investment in affordable housing in Alberta has just kind of quietly become a 7-year investment. So that's 40% longer. How many Albertans will not be housed in affordable housing because this government has dragged its feet in rolling out what should be a compelling project? My guess is they've done that because they want to take a government-first model and not work with not-for-profits, not work with private delivery agencies. And there's no good reason to do that beyond pure ideology and worldview that says that you think that's a good idea. Well, it isn't. We had a model in this province that has worked incredibly well for a very long time, and this government arbitrarily has gone away from it, which has caused people to not be housed in affordable housing who badly, badly need that housing. Seniors housing is another area where we have that similar problem. We talked about Indigenous peoples, and through our work with the Child Intervention Panel, I know that there is some work going on there. There has been some increased funding, and we very much applaud that. But we want to make sure that we're clear here in the Alberta Party that we absolutely support Jordan's principle. It should be the role of the provincial government to ensure that services are provided to children, services are provided to people who need those services, when and where they need those services. And if there's a jurisdictional fight to be had, it is our job as the government to manage that on their behalf. Our job is to manage the complexity. If we need to go fight with Ottawa for funding, we fight with Ottawa for funding. We don't put that on the people of Alberta. On the climate change file, making climate leadership work for Albertans is very important for the Alberta Party. Now, we believe, and have been very clear, that we believe in a properly executed carbon tax. We think that can work. The Alberta Party believes climate change is real. We believe it is human-caused. We believe it is a problem that needs addressing. But we also see the opportunity in addressing climate change in this province. It is not simply a matter of having a few headlines, of creating a carbon tax and then looking to our west and saying, we have a carbon tax, may we please have a pipeline? Clearly that hasn't worked. The purpose of having a carbon tax is to ensure that we have the resources we need to innovate. The purpose of that is to shift behavior and ensure that we have created a framework where innovation can happen here in Alberta. And I firmly believe it will be Alberta companies and Alberta technologies that we will sell to the rest of the world. Here in Alberta, we can solve the problems that our world has as it relates to climate change. And that creates tremendous market opportunity. Unfortunately, we have a government that's looked at it as a simple cash cow, as a source of revenue. And they've, unfortunately, I think, really soured Albertans on what can and should be a very potent policy tool. We saw a group of economists just recently talk about how a well-structured carbon tax can work. We need to move it to revenue neutrality, not as a cash cow. These are the opportunities that exist on the climate change file, but unfortunately this government has let us down. Now I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes here that I have not just talking about what we would do differently, but one of the great concerns I have with this particular budget the government's brought forward. So much of the so-called path, and I don't know if Hansard will be able to capture my air quotes when I say path to balance, but my grave concern is so much of that path to balance is based on if. If we get a Kinder Morgan pipeline built, if that pipeline is built on time, if we get Enbridge Line 3, if that pipeline is built on time, if corporate income tax increases, if personal income tax increases by 40%, if oil prices go to $75, if we turn $3.5 billion of non-renewable resource revenue into $10.5 billion of resource revenue, if this government actually sticks to the very own budget that they put out, which, by the way, you haven't to date at any time. That's an awful lot of ifs. I think I'm running out of fingers on two hands to count up the number of ifs. And there's too much risk. And even if you actually achieve all of those things, we still find ourselves with $96 billion in debt at the end of the day. So in the last minute, I just want to read some questions, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity under 29.2a to talk about some of what I heard at a budget town hall that I held in Calgary Elbow here on the weekend. And just while we're talking about some of the challenges with the carbon tax, one of my constituents asked me to ask the government on her behalf, and I will do this now, how the carbon tax is allowed to be a tax on a tax, how it is that we're allowed to have GST charged on top of the carbon tax. This is a source of great frustration. This is someone who tells me she doesn't mind action on climate change, but had grave concerns about the way this particular government has rolled out the carbon tax. And so on her behalf, I asked that question to the government. So my concerns are, even if this government actually achieves all the things that it says it's going to do, and while I'm cheering for all those things to happen, I really have my doubts that they actually will, we'll still have $96 billion in debt. And even if only one of those things goes wrong, and by the way, as we've obviously seen here recently with Kinder Morgan, we already know that one of those risks has been realized. then we're looking at well in excess of $100 billion in debt. And that is something we and our children are going to have to pay back. That leads to upwards of $4 billion a year.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any members wishing to speak under 29-2A? The Honourable Member for Calgary-McKay, North Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I just want to acknowledge the member from Calgary Elbow for coming up with a shadow budget for 4 budgets in a row. He's done a remarkable amount of work, and it shows he knows this topic really well. And I'm wondering if the member has any sense of what the impact of the shadow budget would be on future generations in contrast to the current budget as it's proposed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And, you know, one of the things our shadow budget would do is we would spend more money on capital investment than this government would propose to spend. And when we have an infrastructure deficit in this province like we do, there's a badly needed schools, not just new schools, but refurbishing existing schools, healthcare facilities, and not just large-scale hospitals, although of course that's a huge part of it, seniors facilities of all different levels to ensure that we can move people out of hospital so they're in community closer to home, but in accommodation that's more appropriate for them, and we're saving the money that we need, that we're investing in affordable housing, that we're investing in transportation infrastructure, that we're investing in transit, that we're investing in flood mitigation. These are things that matter very much to the people of Alberta. So the way you do that, Madam Speaker, and the way you do that is you set your priorities and you ensure that the operational side of spending doesn't get out of control, unfortunately, like this government has. I will take this opportunity to ask some questions and just share some of the dozen or so comments that I asked my constituents to write down when we held a town hall in Calgary Elbow this past Saturday. We had about 20 or so intrepid souls come out in the snow and sleet to talk about the budget. And what struck me was the interest that that group of constituents had in ensuring sustained, high-quality, efficient, and effective public services. That was the message I heard loud and clear. Equally, they understood to do that, we need to be able to pay the bills. And they were willing to make sure that as long as the services that were provided were high quality and efficient and effective, they're willing to pay fair value for that. So some of the questions, and this I think ties to the shadow budget that we have brought in and to the question the member asked. Point number one is ensure a civil and respectful dialogue and climate in government. Well, that isn't always possible in this place, Madam Speaker. Politics has been known to break out in this place. But I do hope that that is a core value of the Alberta Party that we demonstrate, is raising the level of debate, not just opposing for the sake of opposition, but proposing ideas. There was a desire for sustainable funding for schools and ensure that we maintain reasonable class sizes while addressing increasing complexities with our student population, with a specific focus on mental health. And that's something we believe very much in, is a very, very important area of emphasis for us. A constituent felt it was very odd to have a carbon tax on schools, giving a school board a budget and then taking a portion of it back for a carbon tax, money that really should have gone to students. Should that not be exempt? Yes, in my opinion, it should be exempt, and it's an oversight and a shortcoming of the way this government has rolled out the carbon tax. How can we speed up strengthening Indigenous people so we're not continuing to waste the tremendous human potential in Indigenous communities? Again, a very, very thoughtful comment and something that I referenced earlier. How do we not just provide healthcare services, but how do we catch up on wait times and address the health system backlog for better outcomes and long-term cost savings to the system? Invest now to catch up on that backlog, make sure that those wait times are cut down. How do we better educate industry and about public and regulatory expectations so investors know what they're facing in a predictable way? Make sure that we reduce red tape, clarity within the regulatory process of all kinds as a part of the bargain, the grand bargain, to make sure that we attract investors. How are we reducing administration in health, education, and other areas to spend more money on the front lines? An absolutely essential question, especially in healthcare. Someone asked about climate change. The question that was asked by my constituent, what percentage of climate change is due to anthropogenic activity? Of that, how much is discretionary? Someone asked whether we would consider a PST. That was a question that was asked, and that the comment was that they were willing to pay fair value for high-quality public service. How are we preparing young men for adulthood? How do we make sure that I ran out of time.